What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blur Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, let's ponder the question, who is Namor the Submariner?
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Namor the Submariner, full name Namor McKenzie, first appeared in Motion Picture Funny's Weekly #1 in 1939 and was created by Bill Everett. Namor's father, Captain Leonard McKenzie, served on the ship Icebreaker, and during an expedition into the Antarctic to find vibranium back in 1915, he and his crew were discovered by Princess Finn of Atlantis. The two would fall in love with one another, and over time, they conceived Prince Namor. But before he was born, the Atlanteans, in a desperate search for Princess Finn, took her away from Leonard and left him for dead, not knowing she was pregnant with his child. Eventually, Namor would be born and become heir to the throne of Atlantis. Namor is both Atlantean and mutant, explaining why Atlanteans, typically being blue-skinned, Namor always maintained a more Caucasian or, in some cases, Eurasian look. Atlanteans tend to be long-lived, with your average Atlantean living anywhere from 100 to 120 years. As you'll hear a lot in this video, Namor being biracial makes him incredibly different. Case in point, he can likely live longer than your average Atlantean. Namor was born during the 1910s and is roughly 110 years old today and is considered to be in his prime. That said, Marvel tends to operate on a sliding timescale, so his age may not be that accurate to begin with. As an Atlantean, Namor boasts the ability to survive underwater indefinitely, as well as survive deep sea pressure that would crush a normal human to death, and their body possessing superior blood flow and circulation to keep them warm even in the coldest parts of the sea. But one edge Namor has over normal Atlanteans due to his dual heritage is that normally full-blooded Atlanteans can't survive outside of water for longer than 10 minutes without using some form of a breathing aid, whether it's Atlantean technology, magic, or some other method. That said, it is still thought Namor, despite his ability to survive in both environments indefinitely, he still must interact with both environments on some level to truly thrive. We'll talk more about this over the course of this video. It's going to come up more often than not. And if you're wondering how Namor breathes underwater, he does in fact have gills, though we rarely ever see them because they blend in thanks to them being hidden behind his pointy ears. His eyes are also superhumanly enhanced thanks to his Atlantean heritage and allow him to see in total darkness, whether underwater or on the surface, as if he were in a well-lit room. And while his sense of smell and hearing are greater than any human underwater, they're also better than any Atlantean underwater. He can smell and hear underwater no differently than he can on land, something that is impossible for normal humans. And he's once said he can, quotey fingers, hear a school of fish change direction half an ocean away, and when the ocean currents alter by a single degree, he'd know it. He can also navigate the vast ocean depths by way of electrolocation, using the faint electrical currents within the water to know where he is and where he's going at all times, even in instances where he can't see or hear normally. And while all Atlanteans possess superhuman speed that makes them faster than your average Olympic-level athlete, it also allows them to move and swim underwater at roughly 30 to 60 miles per hour on average. But Namor is an exception. He's been clocked at a swim speed of 300 knots or 345 miles per hour. His stamina is assumed to be above average Atlantean physiology, as well as he's been depicted overexerting himself for over 24 hours without showing signs of fatigue, and his reflexes and agility are far greater than an average Atlantean, allowing him to dodge bullets, missiles, thrown weapons like Thor's hammer, things that are normally too fast for the human eye to see. He's also far more durable than your average Atlantean, being able to withstand superpowered attacks, energy blasts, blast, high caliber bullets, even at point blank range, extreme temperatures, falls from terminal and even orbital velocity without even flinching. Many forms of attacks are unable to cause him much harm without consistent application. He's also resistant to radiation to a degree. Like Hulk, he can absorb radiation, but only to a point. We don't really know the upper limit of this, but we do know that if he absorbs too much, he can be knocked unconscious. But like any good hero nowadays, Namor does possess a form of healing factor that allows him to recover from injuries faster than normal humans. But this healing factor is even more effective when he's submerged in water. Without contact with water, his ability to heal grows weaker the longer he's away from it. And his trademark superhuman strength that's allowed him to go toe-to-toe with some of Marvel's hardest hitters like both Hulk and She-Hulk, Luke Cage, Hercules, Thor, Sentry, and even the ever-loving blue-eyed Thing of the Fantastic Four is exceptional even by Atlantean standards. Normally, Atlanteans boast an upper limit of 4 tons. Namor has been depicted lifting far greater weight, like that of a World War II era destroyer without even struggling, which on average, World War II era destroyers weighed over 2,000 tons. Granted, his strength is dependent on his contact with water. In contact with water, his strength is considerably greater, and his upper limit has yet to be reached. But even without contact with water, he's been depicted lifting a 50-ton anchor one-handed and while flying, and still maintaining his normal speed of flight, which we'll get to in just a moment. But just know that outside of water, Namor has been more than a match for some of Marvel's strongest beings, and is even considered to be one of the strongest living things on Earth. That said, only one Marvel Comics hero is big and bad enough to solo Namor and walk out the winner, and that's Hyperion, Marvel's sardonic version of Superman. As for Namor being a mutant, this is where things get even better. Under normal circumstances, Atlanteans do not have the ability to fly. This is where more of his mutant genetics are likely to come into play. As an alpha level mutant, meaning his powers are more suited to combat situations, Namor is able to fly thanks to having vestigial wings on his ankles. This is one of his defining looks. These wings don't necessarily lift him though, but help him balance and steer his flight paths. But under normal circumstances, Namor can fly at escape velocity, which is roughly 11.2 kilometers per second, fast enough to fly from the North Pole to the South Pole in about 21 minutes. These wings do not benefit from his healing factor though, and take much longer to regrow when destroyed. And while we're talking about Namor being a mutant, when Wanda Maximoff uttered the words, "No more mutants," during the events of House of M, he did not lose his powers and remained a mutant, unlike many other characters in the Marvel Comics universe. Now, this is an elephant in the room moment. If you're not as familiar with Namor the Submariner, you might wonder if he is a ripoff of DC Comics' Aquaman. This is not the case. Namor, as mentioned earlier, first appeared in Marvel's Motion Picture Funnies Weekly #1 in April of 1939. Aquaman didn't hit the scene at DC Comics until More Fun Comics #73 in November of 1941. A little over 2.5 years later. That said, both characters have been influential on one another over the years, with Aquaman even taking on a more serious attitude over the last 20 or so years, making him somewhat more in line with Namor without making him a complete and total asshole, and still allowing him to be relatable. They've also possessed roughly the same powers and abilities over the years, but to a somewhat varied degree, thanks to both Marvel and DC always trying to differentiate the two in some way, while also leaving some similarities. Case in point, just like Aquaman, Namor can communicate with aquatic life, where DC always went for the more whimsical approach to Aquaman's ability to do this up until about roughly 15 years ago. Namor's has always been more telepathic suggestion and command, but more recently, this has been depicted as less of a command and more of a suggestion, similar to how Aquaman controls sea life today. That said, Namor used to be able to mimic the abilities of sea creatures, but lost this ability over the years and now relies more on controlling sea life. He can also use his telepathy to communicate with other Atlanteans too. It's even believed that if he chose to, he could have become a very powerful telepath, even by mutant standards. That said, he tends to use his telepathic command over aquatic life to control not just normal sea life, but we've even seen him control more monstrous sea creatures like leviathans and krakens and all sorts of other fictitious kaiju-sized sea life. Another trademark similarity that both Aquaman and Namor possess is Neptune's trident that allows both characters to increase their ability to control aquatic life, but also grants them far greater control over water and weather itself. And while Namor is no storm when it comes to weather manipulation, he's no slouch either. He can cause torrential rain, tidal waves, tsunamis, and other water-related weather effects at will, even without the aid of his trident. But with it, he's far more effective and closer in power to the X-Men Storm than without it. And while he never originally had the power to control water without Neptune's trident, nowadays he can by way of hydrokinesis. He gained this ability by stealing it from Spider-Man villain Hydro-Man in Invaders Volume 3, Number 2 in 2019. With the trident, Namor has used his control over water to drown entire cities. He's mainly been known for drowning Wakanda with the aid of the Phoenix Force, but this wasn't his first drowned city. He drowned New York as well as various other cities across the world in a massive tidal wave in Human Torch number 5 in 1941 using Atlantean technology. Some believe he did this on more than one occasion, but that is due to this event being retold in Marvel's Volume 1, Number 1 in 1994. That said, Namor is not a superhero in the traditional sense, but something more akin to Black Panther. He's a ruler who does what he must, when he must, to protect his people and their realm, the ocean. And many times, this leads to Namor helping save the world, and other times attempting to destroy it. Since, as of this recording, the Earth is 71% water, he sees it as his planet unless everyone else's, and it's hard to argue against that viewpoint. Being a monarch, Namor is skilled in diplomacy, and while Atlantis itself is recognized as an official sovereign nation of the UN, Namor is granted diplomatic immunity, and he tends to use it to go where he wants, whenever he wants, and fights to defend his kingdom regardless of borders or conflicts. This largely leads to Namor's skill in diplomacy being regarded as aggressive because most of the time he simply crushes his opposition rather than treat with them. Namor believes Atlantis is better than anywhere else, and despite being mutant, he sees himself as better than that too. In a lot of ways, Namor would be considered an Atlantean nationalist. And to take it one step further, he has been depicted in Dark X-Men The Beginning number 3 as feeling ugly about being a mutant. Despite his disdain for other cultures outside of the ocean, he's actually quite skilled in speaking with virtually any living species on Earth. He's lived long enough to know all their languages because it's always better if your enemy can hear you threatening to drown them before they die. I'm joking when I say this, but it's very likely true for him. All jokes aside, he is an expert battle tactician, having fought in most of the world's recent wars and conflicts. He's witnessed firsthand how Germany and Russia waged war against each other and the rest of the world. He's seen it all, and he's learned a great deal. He knows how to strike an opponent, whether it's a nation or an individual, and do the most damage to them or their infrastructure. And while he's an excellent field general, he's been on the front lines more than most kings can ever claim. He's skilled in both armed and unarmed combat and can wield virtually any weapon he desires with mastery. But when it comes down to it, Namor would rather throw hands than fight with a weapon if he has any say in the matter. Namor has always been regarded as incredibly hot-headed, and rightfully so, but people tend to forget he's exceptionally intelligent and skilled in the areas of engineering and science. He's helped foster Atlantis' advanced technologies since his time among them, helping them create devastating weapons of mass destruction, many of which have been used to manipulate the ocean to attack unwanted guests, creating torrents, whirlpools, and hurricanes, and as I mentioned before, used one to drown New York under a massive tidal wave. He's also CEO of Oracle Incorporated, a technology and pharmaceutical company many people tend to forget about due to other corporations like Roxxon, Oscorp, Horizon, and Alchemax being more prominent. But don't let that fool you. It's by design. Namor is an incredibly shrewd and effective businessman. Originally, no one even knew he owned the company because he didn't start it himself. He bought another organization using proxy buyers and renamed it during a time when he was thought dead in the early 90s. I've talked a lot about Namor's strength, and as you'd imagine, a man having lived this long and amassing so many strengths, he must have his fair share of weaknesses too. For one, he is affected more negatively by water pollution than normal humans, which is unsurprising for a guy who spends most of his time in water. But being exposed to polluted water, especially if submerged in it, can weaken him significantly. He can also suffer from water deficiency. Just as full-blooded Atlanteans can't survive on the surface for more than a few minutes without aid, Namor can over time suffer from a lack of water contact. Now, this won't kill him, but it will make his powers diminish, making him more in line with average Atlanteans, which is still considerably more powerful than an average human. But it doesn't take long for him to recover from this efficiency. This also makes him highly susceptible to being dehydrated by excessive heat or similar conditions that could dry up the moisture in his body. But the second he makes contact with water again, his powers return to their maximum capacity immediately. These next few I don't like to think of as weaknesses because mental health, no matter what direction, doesn't make anyone weak. But earlier I mentioned Namor can survive indefinitely on both land or underwater as he sees fit. But what I didn't mention was that he is vulnerable to oxygen imbalance. This doesn't physically impair him in any way like water deficiency does, but does tend to cause him to have severe manic depressive mood swings and bipolar tendencies. This has led many to wonder if his arrogant nature and trademark anger management issues are a result of him trying to spend too much time in one environment versus another. This has been used to explain why sometimes he's very reasonable and other times incredibly unapproachable, and also why in the past he seemed friendly with other heroes and later borderline villainous towards them. To put a finer point on it, Namor's trademark anger is even regarded by Magneto as the angriest he's ever seen any living being on Earth. These outbursts and mental health issues aren't something that just come from nowhere though. It's largely believed Namor suffers from PTSD due to his time fighting against the Nazis in World War II. During that time, he witnessed humans commit terrible acts and atrocities against one another, as well as all the horrors he saw committed against his own Atlanteans throughout the years. Whenever those memories arise in his head, and they often do, he becomes triggered, not in the alt-right sense where he's mad because women or other ethnicities and cultures exist, but in the actual professional psychological jargon sense of the word. All of this together has likely created a very anxious and depressed environment within his own headspace, and is most certainly the reason why he tends to hate surface dwellers. For a guy with this much attitude, you'd probably think he wouldn't be on many super teams, but that's actually not the case. He's been a member of not only the Avengers, but the original Recipe Defenders, the Titans 3, the Phoenix 5 during Avengers vs. X-Men, the Swift Tide, the Queen's Vengeance, the All-Winter Squad, the Illuminati, Cyclops' Extinction Team during Regenesis, the X-Men, both the actual X-Men and Norman Osborn's X-Men during Dark Reign, all the while being a member of Norman Osborn's Cabal, though that's not the only Cabal Namor has been a part of. He created his own Cabal after he fell out with the Illuminati due to his destroying Earth 4,290,001 in an attempt to save their own Earth during the incursions. This cabal was notable because it included Thanos and his Black Order. He's also the leader of the Defenders of the Deep. He's also a member of the Invaders, a team Stan Lee originally intended to be a way to team up Namor with the Hulk, but this was dropped and eventually became the Defenders in 1971. This idea of the Invaders would return in 1969, oddly enough before Defenders debuted, thanks to Roy Thomas, who made Namor a part of the Invaders, a team that actively fought against the Nazis. He's also been highly sought after for his membership in other groups, originally refusing the Avengers in the past before eventually joining their ranks, but also refusing joining Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and Sebastian Shaw's Hellfire Club. He also refused Iron Man's advances, choosing to align himself with Captain America during Civil War, and refused Xavier Magneto's attempts to ally himself with Krakoa not once, but twice. Despite this, he's not a guy known for having many friends, but he does hold some in high regard. He was the only person who was against exiling the Hulk during the Planet Hulk story arc. He even attempted to kill Iron Man in an effort to stop it from happening. He's also maintained a reluctant friendship, or rather partnership, with Dr. Doom over the years, though largely because when Namor needed help defending Atlantis, Doom was one of the few people to offer him aid. And while he's had his wars with Wakanda, he and T'Challa did become reluctant allies even after Wakanda was drowned by the Atlantean King in AVX. Outside of that, Namor was actually invited to Black Panther's wedding to Storm and was even present for T'Challa's bachelor party. Granted, this was before he drowned Wakanda under a tidal wave. And T'Challa's not the only black person that Namor kicks it with. He's also friendly with Blue Marvel, and even helped him build his underwater base. All that aside, Namor isn't above criticizing himself. During Secret Wars, he had an opportunity to wield the Infinity Gauntlet. When it came down to a decision of who would wield the gauntlet between himself and Black Panther, Namor said T'Challa should wield it because by Namor's own admission, he cannot be trusted. Namor also has the distinction of being some of Marvel's first in a lot of respects. He's officially Marvel's first character to have a 70+ year history, and he's also Marvel's first mutant. And while I hear the pitchforks already being picked up to persecute the hell out of me for saying this, he's the first mutant because he was the first mutant ever created by Marvel. Yes, there are several dozen other mutants, like Apocalypse, and hell, now there's even an entire 2 planets worth of mutants who predate him nowadays, but these are by Marvel's in-universe timeline, not publication history. Case in point, Apocalypse is older than Namor, but he never appeared in a comic until X-Factor number 5 in 1986. 46 years after Namor first hit comic shelves. Whenever you hear someone say Namor is Marvel's first mutant, they mean Namor is Marvel's first mutant character they ever created. He's also Marvel's first biracial character, and in a lot of ways is an allegory for interracial relations and biracial people. All that aside, he's only Marvel's second flyer. Other heroes created at Marvel lacked this ability, with the only other character being ahead of Namor being the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond, who first displayed this ability prior to the Submariner. One thing many don't recognize about Namor is his name is Roman backwards. This is likely tied to creator Bill Everett basing a lot of his early stories off the Roman Empire. Speaking of meanings, many have expressed confusion over Namor's trademark battle cry, Imperious Rex. Some believe it means the ruling king or the commanding king if translated from Latin. Others think it has no meaning at all and is just a simple battle cry like it's clobbering time or Hulk smash, which isn't far from being likely. But in 2018's Thor #1, it was revealed what it truly means in a tongue-in-cheek sort of way. When Thor expressed he had no idea what Imperious Rex meant after literally decades of the two characters being around one another, Namor simply replies, "It means I'm going to feed your sorry Asgardian hide to the biggest sharks I can find." This was likely not really the meaning, and Namor being flippant, but I've long held the belief Imperious Rex is simply just a mixture of being a battle cry, but also having those same Latin translations, so it's kind of a best of both worlds situation. Namor is about to grace the big screen in the MCU's Black Panther sequel, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, being played by Tenoch Huerta, and this is a huge departure from the character because, well, for one, he's depicted as not being Atlantean, but being of a species called the Tolokans, a society that reflects the iconography and cultural touchstones of Aztecs. And what makes this even cooler is that the Tolokans' name actually comes from an actual Aztec rain god, Tlaloc, making the change in Namor's species that much more interesting. And for those curious why the character hasn't shown up previously, it was recently revealed that Michael Waldron, the writer of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, has come out recently saying that Namor was originally supposed to appear in Multiverse of Madness, but his inclusion was blocked by Kevin Feige because he had other plans for the character. And considering how that scene in Multiverse of Madness played out for the Illuminati, you can see why. That said, let's get into some recommended reading. I'm gonna recommend that you check out Saga of the Submariner, number 1 through 12. This is a way to get a somewhat more modern retelling of Namor's origin and get you up to speed on the character and learn as much about him humanly possible without having to go all the way back to those books from the late 1930s and early 1940s. I will also recommend that you check out Fantastic Four Volume 1, number 4, 6, 9, 14, and 27, because this is technically where Namor makes his first official modern Marvel era appearances in the 1960s. This is also a really cool way to get to know how this character had changed so much from his original 1940s counterpart. I will also recommend you check out Avengers Volume 1, number 282 through 293. This would basically kind of give you an idea of what was going on with Namor back then and how he initially didn't really want to have much to do with the Avengers and then eventually just kind of wound up being around them a lot, and even probably one of his most harrowing moments where he has to kill his own wife. I'll also recommend you check out Namor, the First Mutant, number 1 through 11, because this is also a very interesting time in Namor's publication history because he's wrestling with being a mutant. Not that he's never wrestled with it before, but this is technically one of the first times he's really focused on being a mutant, more so than during the John Byrne run. I'll also recommend you check out Black Panther Volume 4, number 21, to get an idea of just how much Namor actually respects T'Challa as a ruler and king of Wakanda, and in a roundabout way kind of makes a lot of the things that we've witnessed, all the bad blood between T'Challa and Namor over the years, seem that much more heartbreaking. I'll also recommend you check out Avengers vs. X-Men number 7 and 8 if you want to witness Namor at what I would believe is his most powerful and committing one of his most atrocious acts in drowning millions of innocent people in Wakanda while wielding 1/5 of the Phoenix Force. And if you want to get an idea of why this wasn't Namor's first most atrocious act, go back and check out The Human Torch Volume 1, number 5 to see the first time he ever drowned New York City. I'll also recommend you check out Jonathan Hickman's New Avengers, pretty much the entire series, because Namor features very heavily throughout it. But if you want to break it down into more specific issues, I will cherry pick Jonathan Hickman's New Avengers, number 7 and 8, number 17 through 18, number 21 through 24, and number 28. And if you want a more recent take on what's been going on with Namor lately, first I'm going to recommend Avengers Volume 8, number 9 and 10, and last but most certainly not least, Invaders Volume 3, number 1 through 6. In both of these titles, Namor is acting a complete and total whole monkey, and it's a sight to behold. I think this is actually his most problematic he's probably ever been, and yes, this is after he drowned an entire city. But anyways, Namor is not an easy guy to label and put in a box. He's a lot of things to many people, not just in universe, but in real life too. Across his history, he's been not just a king of Atlantis and a hero, but also a villain, a ruler, a conqueror, an avenger, a defender, and so much more. Namor is a guy who can just as easily be an avenger today and cause the Earth's destruction tomorrow. He's a mercurial guy like that, not that dissimilar to characters like Doctor Doom, but I always felt Namor is something more primal. He ebbs and flows with the tides of the ocean, and this gives so much credence to the mental health issues the character has that I mentioned earlier. The only consistent factor that drives his anger is whether or not his people are in danger, and in a lot of ways, thanks to the surface world, they always are. He's watched for over 100 years as the oceans are relentlessly polluted, endangering Atlantis and what is essentially his kingdom and home, and these are all things that could kill not only his people but himself as well. And while his actions always seem rash, he's never entirely wrong about the level of threat this is for Atlantis. To both save and restore Atlantis in various instances, he's risked entire other realities to save his home, but at the same time, he's drowned more than one city on Earth to protect his own ambitions. He's a complicated guy. I'm not really sure you're even supposed to love a character like Namor, much less like him. I've always felt he's that kind of character you're just supposed to be ready for anything to happen when he shows up. Quotey fingers, hero. But anyways, with Black Panther Wakanda Forever on the horizon, and very possibly already out by the time this video comes out, if you want to know more about some of Wakanda Forever's main characters like Shuri and Ironheart, check out these videos right here, and in the meantime, let me know what you think about Namor the Submariner. Keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.